There is something about a fire at night. It goes back further than memory, further than history. Something in the oldest part of the human brain responds to. The warmth, the light, the way it holds the dark back just enough to make you feel safe. Our ancestors sat around fires like this one for hundreds of thousands of years. They cooked beside them, they slept beside them, they told stories beside them. And the stories they told were not always comforting ones. Some stories were warnings, some were records, some were attempts to make sense of things that had been seen or heard or felt out there in the dark beyond the firelight. Things that don't have good explanations and maybe still don't. These are the stories I'm interested in. My name is Paul. Welcome to Voices from the Veil, a place where I sit with you beside the fire and read you the stories that people tell in low voices. The ones that came out of the dark forests and never quite went back in. The ones from the house at the end of the road. The ones from the stretch of highway where something was standing that shouldn't have been standing there. These stories come from everywhere because the dark is everywhere. Tonight I have 3 stories for you. They were told to me as true, so find somewhere comfortable, turn the lights down if you haven't already, and listen close. Because wherever it is out there tonight, it's already listening to you. The Screaming Woman. I grew up close to Grandfather Mountain, that on clear mornings I could see the ridgeline from my bedroom window, just sitting there against the sky, dark and jagged, like something that had been there since before the world decided what it was going to be. My grandfather used to say the mountain had a memory, that it remembered everything that had ever happened on it, every footstep, every prayer, every last breath. I used to roll my eyes at him when he said things like that. I don't anymore. This October, about 15 years back, I was 23 years old and still wearing that particular kind of stupidity that comes with being 23. The kind where you genuinely believe nothing is going to happen to you. My buddy Dale had been on me for months about going on a night hike up Grandfather Trail. Dale was like that, always chasing the thing that made his pulse go up. I'd put him off all summer, but when the leaves started to turn and the nights got cold, and he showed up at my door with 2 headlamps and a thermos of black coffee, I figured I'd run out of reasons to say no. We hit the trailhead around 9. The parking lot was empty, except for Dale's truck, which should have told me something. In the daylight, that trail is beautiful. Rocky switchbacks, old growth hardwoods, views that make you feel like you're standing on the spine of the world. At night, it's something else entirely. Your headlamp turns everything beyond its reach into a wall of black. The trees you know are becoming shapes you can't quite confirm. The wind moves through the canopy above you, and it sounds, I'm not joking, it sounds like breathing, long and slow and just slightly out of rhythm with your own. We were 2 miles up, the temperature had dropped hard, and our breath was coming out in little clouds. And Dale was up ahead, talking about some camping trip he wanted to plan in the spring, and then he stopped, so suddenly I walked into his backpack. "Hey, shut up," he said. Not rude, just urgent. And I shut up and I heard it. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing. Something like your body picks up before your ears do, a vibration in your chest. Then it rose into a sound that I can only describe as a woman in a kind of pain or fear that has moved past screaming and into something more fundamental, raw, ancient, primal. It came from the left of the trail, from somewhere in the trees where neither of our headlamps reached, and it rose and fell and rose again. It was like being carried on the wind, even though the wind had stopped. Every hair on my body stood up, and I mean every hair. My arms, the back of my neck, the back of my hands. My body knew something my brain was still arguing about. Dale took a step off the trail towards it. I grabbed the back of his jacket. "Don't," I said. "What if someone's hurt?" "That's not hurt," I told him, and I believed it when I said it. Whatever that sound was, it was not coming from something that could be helped. It was coming from something that had been beyond help for a long time. Dale stood there for a moment, his light sweeping back and forth through the trees, illuminating nothing but trunks and shadows and the pale underside of the leaves. And then the screaming stopped. like a switch had been thrown. Complete silence. Not the normal silence of the woods at night, which has texture and movement in it. Crickets, the creak of a branch, the distant sound of water. There was a silence that felt placed, deliberate, like something had noticed us, noticing it. Dale came back to the trail without me saying another word. We went down, fast. Not running, but close to it, and neither of us said much. The sounds of our boot on the rocks seemed too loud, and the darkness on either side of the trail seemed closer than it had on the way up. I called my grandfather when I got home. Past midnight, it didn't matter. He answered on the second ring, voice clear, like he hadn't been asleep at all. I started to describe what we'd heard, and he stopped me gently. "The screaming woman," he said. His voice was soft, careful, the way you'd say a name in a church. He told me what his grandfather had told him, that the Cherokee knew her long before settlers ever set foot on that mountain. A young woman, during winter, separated from her people in a storm that came down fast and mean off the high ridge. She wandered for days up in the cold and the dark, calling out for anyone who might hear her, and no one did, and she died up there alone, afraid, and so far from home, she couldn't have found her way back even if she'd lived. And so, she's still looking, still calling, still hoping that this time someone will answer. "Has anyone ever answered?" I asked him. My voice came out smaller than I expected. He was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. No one who answered ever came back down to tell about it. I still hike Grandfather Mountain. I love that trail. I love the views from the top and the way the rocks feel under your hands on the hard scrambles, and the way the sky opens up when you break through the tree line. But I go in daylight now. I go when the sun is high and the parking lot has other cars in it, and there are other voices on the trail ahead of me. And when I hear the wind move through the trees up on the high ridge, it sounds just for a moment like something almost human. I keep walking. I don't stop. I don't listen. And I absolutely screaming woman towards the trees. Take a breath if you need one. The next story, it was told to me by someone who had no reason to make it up and every reason to wish it hadn't happened. This one stayed with me. I need to start by telling you that my father was a good man. I say that because by the time I finish telling you this story, you might wonder. You might find yourself questioning things about him the way I did for a long time after it happened. I want you to hold on to that. He was a good man, a quiet man. He worked timber his whole life, knew those mountains the way most people knew their own kitchen, could read the weather in the way a cloud sat on the ridgeline, and find north from the moss on a rock and tell you the name of every creek and holler in 3 counties. He was not a man who frightened easily. He was not a man who talked about things that unsettled him. Which is why, the night he came home shaking, unable to look my mother in the eye, speaking in a voice I had never heard from him before or since, a voice that was small and careful, like a man handling something that might break or bite him, I knew that whatever had happened out on that ridge was not something I was ever going to be able to explain away. I was 16. This was late October. The kind of cold that comes in early to the high country and means business. Frost on the truck windows by 9 at night, and your breath coming out in clouds by dusk. My father had been out since before dawn, checking on a section of timber his crew was set to start cutting the following Monday. Routine work. He'd walked that section of the ridge 100 times over the years. He knew every stump and stone on it. He was supposed to be home by 4. He came through the door at 11:30 at night, 7.5 hours late, and something was wrong with him in a way that took me a moment to identify because I had never seen it in him before. He was afraid, not startled, not rattled, not the ordinary unease of a man who'd had a bad day, afraid the way an animal is afraid, deeply and physically, in the body, in the eyes. He sat down at the kitchen table, and my mother put her hands on his face and asked him what had happened, and he just shook his head for a long time. Then he told us. He'd finished his survey work by early afternoon and started back down the ridge towards where he'd parked his truck. The route took him along a creek drainage, a 2-mile walk through second growth timber, nothing he hadn't done 100 times before. About a mile from the truck, he stopped to drink from the creek, and that's when he heard it. His name. Someone was calling his name from the woods above the creek. Not shouting, calling. The way you call someone you know, easily and familiar, expecting them to answer. He said the voice was a man's voice, and it was something he recognized, but he couldn't immediately place who. It was the nagging familiarity of a voice he knew from somewhere, just out of reach of identification. He called back, asked who was there. The voice called his name again. Same tone, same easy familiarity, and now it was closer, moving through the trees towards the creek. He said he could hear footsteps in the dry leaves, a heavy, deliberate tread. The sound of something that wasn't trying to be quiet because it had no reason to be. Then it stepped out of the tree line. My father said he saw it clearly. The light was still good, mid-afternoon, and it stepped out into the open ground beside the creek, maybe 30 feet from where he was standing, and he saw it clearly, and what he saw was himself. Not someone who resembled him, not a stranger, with similar features. Himself. His own face on another body, his own eyes, his own way of standing, with the weight slightly to one side, his own jacket. The old brown Carnhart he owned for 20 years, the one with the tear on the left sleeve where he'd caught it on a fence wire, wearing it, standing there at the edge of the tree, wearing his face, his jacket, and looking at him, with an expression that he said was almost right, almost a normal expression, but not quite. The eyes were wrong in a way he couldn't specify, not the colour, not the shape, just wrong, the way a copy is wrong, when it's very good but not perfect. Something behind them that his own eyes didn't have, something that had never been behind any human eyes. It smiled at him. He said the smile was the worst part. It was his smile. He knew his own smile, had seen it in mirrors his whole life, but the way it moved onto the face was wrong, too slow, then too fast, like something had been practicing smiling by watching, but had never quite gotten the timing right. He ran. He said he didn't make a decision to run, his body just ran. The way your hand pulls back from a hot stove before your brain has processed the heat. He went down that creek drainage at a dead sprint for the better part of a mile, crashing through brush, sliding on wet rock, not looking back, not stopping, not making a sound, because some instinct told him very clearly that making a sound was the wrong thing to do. He heard it behind him, not running, walking, the same heavy deliberate tread in the dry leaves, keeping pace with him without hurrying, like it knew exactly where he was going and was in no rush because it knew something about how this ended that he didn't. He reached the truck, got the door open and got inside and got the engine started and pulled out into the logging road and drove. He said he looked into the rearview mirror once as he pulled away. It was standing at the edge of the tree line where the woods met the road, still wearing his face, still wearing that almost right expression, watching the truck go. He said it raised one hand as he drove away, not threatening, not beckoning, just a wave. His wave. The same small understanding wave he gave to neighbours when he passed them on the road. Casual, familiar, like it wasn't saying goodbye for now, like it fully expected to see him again. My father never went back to that ridge. He pulled his crew off the timber contract, took the financial penalty without explanation, and never once in the remaining 22 years of his life set foot in that drainage again. When I was older, he would occasionally talk about it, always late at night, always after a long silence that told me he'd been thinking about it. He said only one thing about what it might have been. He said the old timers had a name for it. It was called a fetch. That it was a thing that wore the face of a living person, and that if you followed it into the woods, you were never seeing it again. That the only reason he was alive to tell was that he ran before I could speak a third time, because the old timers said, if it speaks to you 3 times, if you hear your own name in your own voice a third time, something switches, something in you goes quiet, and something else comes forward, and you walk towards it into the trees, and the you that walked in doesn't come back out. He said he heard his name begin for the 3rd time as he turned to run. He said he got 1 syllable of it before the distance swallowed the rest. 1 syllable. He never told me if it sounded like him when it said it. I never asked. Some answers change things in the way you can't change back, and we both knew it, and we sat together in the dark with that knowledge between us like stone on the table, neither of us willing to pick it up. He died 4 years ago, a good death, old age, his own bed, my mother holding his hand. I was there. In the last hour, when he was going in and out and not always making sense, he grabbed my wrist suddenly and held it hard and looked at me with his eyes very clear and very focused, the way they sometimes get right at the end. He said, "Don't go back up there." I asked him where. He didn't answer. His eyes went soft again, and a few hours later he was gone. I hadn't been back to that ridge. I don't know what's up there. I know what my father saw, and I know that whatever it was, it waved goodbye like it knew I had more time, like it was patient, like it was still up there on that ridge in the cold October dark, wearing a dead man's face, waiting to see if the sun had more sense than to come looking. I do. I think. That was the thing that wore my father's face. That one sticks with me. It really is in my brain after that. This next story is called The Hollow Road. I told this story exactly twice in my life before tonight. Once to my sister, the night it happened, sitting in her kitchen at 2 a.m, with every light in the house on and my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I never drank because I kept forgetting it was there. And once to a man I met at a truck stop outside of Kingsport, Tennessee, about a year later, a stranger who looked at me when I sat down across from him and said, unprompted, "You've seen something on the roads, the way you'd say you look tired or you've been in the rain, just a plain statement of fact, like it was written on me somewhere he could read." I told him. He nodded slowly the whole way through, like I was confirming something he already knew rather than telling him something new. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "There are roads in these mountains that go somewhere else at night." He paid his bill and left, and I never saw him again. I've thought about what he said almost every day since. This was 11 years ago. I was 29, driving home from my cousin's place in Harlan, County Kentucky, late on a Saturday night in November. It's a long drive back to where I lived then, down in Flag Pond, Tennessee. Maybe 2.5 hours on a good night, through some of the most remote stretches of road in the southern Appalachians. I've made the drive a dozen times. I know the roads. I know the landmarks. I know which gas stations were open late, and which curves wanted your full attention, and where the deer were most likely to come out of the tree line. I knew that road. That's what I need you to understand before I tell you what happened. I knew that road, and then I was on a road I had never seen in my life. I do not know how one became the other. There was no turn I missed, no intersection where I went wrong. One moment I was on Route 421, heading south with the Appalachian Mountains dark on either side, and the next moment, not gradually, not after a confusing series of turns, but between one moment and the next, the road was different. The asphalt was older, cracked differently. The centre line faded almost to nothing. The trees were closer on both sides, pressing in, and they were wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. Too tall, too dark, like trees that had been growing in the particular dark for longer than trees should grow. I told myself I'd missed a turn. I slowed down. I looked for a place to pull over and check my phone. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual in that part of the mountains. But when I opened the map app to use the offline version, Something was wrong with it though. The blue dot that showed your location was there, but it wasn't on any road. It was sitting in a blank space on the map, the kind of featureless grey that means no data, no roads, nothing recorded. Just me as a blue dot in the middle of nothing. I kept driving, because stopping felt worse than moving. The road curved and climbed, and I told myself it would come out somewhere I recognized. I had to. Roads go somewhere. That's what roads do. Then I came around a long bend, and my headlights showed me a figure standing in the road. A woman standing dead center in my lane, facing me, not moving. I hit the brakes hard enough that the back of the truck stepped out, and I came to a stop, maybe 20 feet from her. My headlights were full on her face. She was old, not elderly, old in a way that felt different from age, worn down past the point where age normally stops, like something that had been out in the weather for a very long time. Her clothes were wrong for this season. A thin dress, dark coloured, no coat, no jacket. It was at her sides. Her feet were bare on the cold asphalt. Her hair was long and loose, and it moved slightly in the wind. I couldn't feel the inside of the truck. She was looking directly at me, not at my headlights, at me. Through the windshield, past the light, directly at my face with an expression that I can only describe as expectant. Like she'd been waiting for this specific vehicle, this specific driver, and here I was, right on schedule. I sat there with my foot on the brake and the engine running, and I did not move. Every part of me that was still thinking clearly was screaming a single instruction. Do not get out of the truck. Do not roll down the window. Do not acknowledge her in any way that requires you to open any part of this vehicle to whatever it is outside. We stayed like that for what felt like a very long time. Her standing in the road, me sitting behind the wheel, the headlights between us, like something that was holding rather than illuminating. Then she took a step towards the truck. Just one step, slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. And I saw, as she moved, that her feet, her bare feet on the cold asphalt, made no sound. I know that sounds like a small thing, but it was not a small thing. Her foot came down on that road, and there was nothing. Not the soft impact of footfall, not the scrape of skin on asphalt. Nothing. Like the sound was being removed from that moment, rather than simply absent from it. She took another step. I put the truck in reverse. I don't know exactly what made me do it that way instead of just driving forward around her, or driving forward through her if it came to it. Something very old and very clear in the back of my brain said, you do not turn your back on this. You do not take your eyes off this. You go backwards and you keep looking at it until you are somewhere else. I reversed down that road for a quarter mile with my eyes on her the whole time, and she followed. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She walked at the same slow, deliberate pace, and she kept up with me completely. Closing no distance, but losing none either, keeping the same 20 feet between us with no apparent effort, her bare feet making no sound on the road, her eyes on me the entire time, her expression never changing, the expectant look, patient and certain, like she knew something about where this ended. I came around a bend I'd come around before, and the road changed again. Like before, not gradually, not with any transition I could identify, just different, better asphalt, a visible clear line, trees the right distance back from the shoulder, and my phone suddenly loud in the cup holder, signal bars appearing, the map redrawing itself with roads and names, and the blue dots setting onto Route 421 like I had never been anywhere else. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No woman, no figure, just dark asphalt running back into the darkness between the trees, the dotted centre line ticking away under my headlights, the mountains sitting on either side exactly as they had always been. I I drove home without stopping. I called my sister from the driveway, and she came out and unlocked the door, and one look at my face told her not to ask questions until I was inside with the lights on. I've driven Route 421 many times since that night. I know exactly where it happened. There's a particular curve, a particular stand of trees, a place where the road dips slightly before it climbs, and every time I pass it, I feel something shift in my chest, a tightening, a recognition. But the road is always the right road, the trees are always the right distance, and the centre line is always there. I've never found the other road, the one with the older asphalt, and the trees that were too tall, and the dark that was too thick. I've looked at maps, satellite images, every back road and logging track in that part of the mountains. It isn't there, not on any map, not in any database. Just a black grey space where the dot floated in nothing. The man at the truck stop, the one who said there are roads in these mountains that go somewhere else at night. I've thought about what he meant for 11 years. I think he meant it literally. I think he knew from experience that there are places in those old mountains where whatever separates here from somewhere else gets thin, where a road that exists in daylight develops a shadow at night, a mirror version of itself that goes somewhere the original doesn't. And I think whatever lives at the end of that shadow road sometimes comes to the boundary between one and the other and stands there, waiting for someone to stop instead of reverse, for someone to get out of the car, for someone to answer when it calls. Because I haven't told you the last part yet. When she took that second step towards my truck, just before I put it in reverse, she opened her mouth. I had the windows up, the truck was running. I should not have been able to hear anything from outside. I heard her. She said my name. Not a name that sounded like mine, not a similar sound that I interpreted as my name in a moment of fear. My name, my full name, first and last, in a voice that sounded like a creak makes when the water is very low and moving over dry rock, thin and whispering and cold. She said in a voice that knew me, said in a voice that had always known me. I don't know what would have happened if I'd answered. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gotten out of the truck and walked towards her down that road that isn't on any map. I know I didn't. I know I reversed down that road for a quarter mile with my eyes on her the whole time, and I came back out the other side, and I drove home, and I've been very careful ever since about which roads I take at night and what I do when something is standing in them. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through a dark stretch of mountain road, and the trees are close on both sides, and the centre line starts to look faded, I look at the road ahead of me very carefully, and I check the asphalt looks right, and I make sure the trees are the right distance back, because somewhere in those mountains there's a road that only exists at night, and there is something on it that knows my name, and the last time I saw it, it was waiting. That's where the story ends, or at least, that's where the telling of it ends. Whether the story itself is truly over is another question, not one I can answer for you. If you have a story of your own, something that happened out in these mountains, or anywhere else where the dark gets thick and the explanations run out, I want to hear it. You can reach me at submittheveil@gmail.com, linked in the description below. Every story on this channel began with someone deciding that what happened to them deserved to be heard. You might be next. If this found you at the right moment, if it sat with you the way I hoped it would, please subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me which part got under your skin. I read every one. I'll be back around this fire soon. Until then, sleep well.